So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Jacqueline Gillis. My practicum was a little different than others in this program as I completed my practicum through the Public Health Agency of Canada as part of their Student Public Health Officer program. So my assignment was to BC Northern Health to work on their climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessment. My specific role was to provide stakeholder engagement and mapping support under the direction of Diana Kutzner, their new climate change and health lead. Though I worked remotely from my home on the Sunshine Coast in the unceded territory of the Sechelt Nation. The image you see on this slide is from my final presentation to BC Northern Health dated March 31st, 2023. As I mentioned, my work with Northern Health was on creating a stakeholder map for their climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessment, or CCHVAA for short. Though my scope was not initially defined, as the project began, it was narrowed down to internal stakeholders with a focus on the Population and Public Health Department or branch of Northern Health. So what is stakeholder mapping? It's a form of visually mapping its stakeholder degree of engagement and or level of project involvement. For our map, we engaged in a mixed methods approach, which involved a series of 45-minute interviews with department heads and leads within population and public health, assessing their level of engagement in the project according to a modified IAP2 spectrum of public participation score. So essentially, we scored them from 1 till 5. Higher scores indicated higher involvement. The stakeholder map wasn't the only purpose of my interviews. I also wanted to get an idea of the baseline of information for each department. So in these interviews, 3 questions were asked to get background information. Those questions were, what are your concerns regarding current and future climate change health hazards, for example, heat, flooding, wildfires, as it relates to your programs? What work has your team already been involved in addressing climate change impacts, and what are your needs to prepare for future climate change impacts? So in other words, we asked, like, what do you hope to get from the VAA process? The main deliverables of my practicum were the stakeholder map itself, shown in a redacted form on the slide, a raw data spreadsheet that can be used as a reference tool for future work on the CCHVAA, as well as a final report outlining my activities and methods, as well as identified issues and analysis with recommendations as the project continues. As my placement and interviews progressed, something emerged as a common concern for the managers and leads that I interviewed. There was an identified lack of cohesion and communication between the departments. To illustrate why this happens, I've created a generic diagram of a traditional top-down organizational structure. Due to confidentiality issues, I can't show you the internal Northern Health org charts. They look very similar to this, though. So if you look at the diagram on the left, even within Population and Public Health Department, each group and team operates separately with very little collaboration. Departments are siloed. So when discussing emergency management and concerns around climate change events, this was identified as a concern. And as I began to study organizational structures, I began to recognize that this form of organizational structure was possibly not conducive to dealing with large systemic changes and problems such as climate change. I also recognized that the work I was doing was actually cross-cutting across departments, and that my supervisor's role as climate change lead was essentially going to be a cross-cutting role as well in a larger capacity. But this is not the way that Northern Health typically operates, which led me to research other institutions who have changed their organizational structures to meet the needs of climate change. The UN Climate Change Secretariat has a fantastic page on their new organization and how it integrates in a horizontal structure as a means of dealing with very large scale and intersectoral nature of climate change. So this is illustrated in the graphic to the right. As you can see, they have created specific cross-cutting roles that act horizontally within the system. So the question is, what can be done about, I'm having technical issues, guys. As I interviewed public health professionals in the Department of Population and Public Health in Northern Health, a number of individuals expressed their lack of knowledge around climate change and specifically around the effects of climate change on human health. And they also expressed a lack of knowledge around where their specific expertise in public health fit within the greater climate change and health portfolio. So the question is, what can be done about health systems and climate change and health core skills? The public health core competencies are inclusive of many skills needed to deal with climate change and health, but they are lacking in dealing with large systemic problems and change. Perhaps climate change should be expressly included in the core competencies, or a greater emphasis on the understanding of large-scale systems change and application thereof. A greater emphasis on the role of climate change in changing human health and the way in which it will change health of populations could be emphasized at the university level, combined with an expansion of the core competencies, providing a better baseline and foundation for public health professionals as they move into jobs where dealing with climate change will, unfortunately, be a standard threat to health. And the final recommendation is perhaps the most complex and difficult to achieve, which is to begin the process of changing health systems in general to better deal with large systemic change, particularly climate change. New positions can be created now that act as cross-cutting roles and horizontally interact with multiple departments. The climate change lead at Northern Health is a singular example of this, but I think it could be used as a template for future roles at Northern Health and in health systems in Canada in general. A resilience coordinator could be created to act as another go-between, not just for climate change, but also for all large-scale systems change within Northern Health. On a larger scale, on a larger timeline, as health systems undergo reorganization, former organizational structures could be dismantled as new positions could be created to replace top-down siloed positions with an emphasis on collaborative and intersectoral work. However, to paraphrase Dr. Margot Greenwood from her presentation yesterday, I am left with more questions than answers at this point, which is perhaps apropos for the capstone to my degree and my learning. And that's everything. Thank you.